What's up, everybody? What is up? It is Cam Smith along with my man Drew Stevens from the Bigs. And look, this is a new edition, a new episode of the By the Horns podcast presented by Toyota. And always remember that Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. So find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. Drew, preseason is over, man. Finally, we're getting to some real basketball. And I look at preseason as a way of, fine-tuning some things, knocking some rust off, getting some chemistry in. But let's just be honest, man. They're glorified scrimmages. That's what I'm just going to put it as, right? So
No
only 5 games for the Bulls, but they did finish above 500, won 3 of 5, and none more dramatic than their final preseason game, which happened at the United Center last Friday against the Cleveland Cavaliers. The second time that they faced off against the Cavaliers, and they beat them 139-137. And Drew, it went to overtime Friday night. Like I get that certain people are basketball purists and they love basketball as much as possible, but overtime on a Friday night in a preseason game, I'm like, okay, all right, well, I'm a basketball junkie, so I didn't mind too much, but I know some people had some things to say. So that was the second preseason win for the Chicago Bulls over the Cleveland Cavaliers. And it was definitely dramatic, man, especially when you look at just what the first 5 was able to do. And you had a situation where Josh Giddey did not play, dealing with his own injury that he was dealing with, just kind of set him out and left him out for that. But Ayo Dosunmu stepped in and really showed up for that Bulls team. It was 5 players, 5 starters, all scored in double figures for that group. And I mentioned Ayo Dosunmu, he had 19 points and went 5 of 7 from 3. And we mentioned his name time and time again of Bulls shooting coach Peter Patton and what he's been able to do to work with guys and get their shot better. But Ayo, and we know him, covering him from when he was on the South Side against Fort Morgan Park High School. And just he's a guy that always works on his game. So it feels like he understands what this opportunity could be, especially for himself in the final preseason game. And Ayo will be in the main rotation. Yeah. And for Bulls fans and listeners out there, we will get to that rotation conversation for Billy Donovan, the head coach of the Chicago Bulls, because he has some interesting moves to make with it just guard heavy, emphasis on heavy roster, especially coming off the bench, Drew. So when you look at the Bulls from that preseason game, not just the final one, but just the entire preseason of those 5 games, what really stood out to you? Because there are a few names and also a few situations that stood out to me about this Bulls team.
So I think right off the bat, just speaking in terms of Billy Donovan's preference to have this team play more of an up-tempo style of play, have them take more threes, that much was accomplished. They finished, I think, second in the league in 3-point attempts per game. They finished with the quickest pace in the league for preseason. Again, we want to throw that caveat out there that it's just a preseason. We don't know how much of this stuff is going to transfer over when the games count for real, starting Tuesday for most teams and Wednesday for the Bulls. But it at least gives us something to take into the regular season and at least know that they're doing a decent job of implementing this stuff on the court for Billy Donovan. On an individual standpoint, I think we all can agree that Zach LaVine looks healthy. He looks committed to doing everything he said he would do on media day, which is being, again, like the good soldier, not trying to rock the boat, doing whatever the team asks him to do, playing the role that this team needs him to play. Vucevic looks pretty good. Like everybody, like you spoke to it in terms of that game on Friday, everybody looks pretty good for the most part. I do have my concerns about Jalen Smith's 3-point shooting. I have my concerns with Josh Giddey's defense and his 3-point shooting, which has been something that has, been a question regarding him since he's been a pro and will continue to do so until he is able to clean up one or both of those kind of bugaboos of his game. But, while I don't think that this team is going to be a playoff team or is going to win, a ton of games, I do think they're going to be pretty fun to watch if they play this style of basketball. And, it's one thing for this team to move on from DeMar DeRozan and the type of basketball that he likes to play. That also was interesting to watch because of the player that DeMar is and the way he can deliver in the clutch. But just the fact that they're shifting to something different in and of itself gives us something to look forward to, something different, because it's kind of unknown. And the fact that they are taking these threes, they're, sharing the basketball, they're trying to play faster. Like, that's a good brand of basketball to watch. Hopefully the defense doesn't crater as bad as we think or believe it will, but at least from the offensive side of things, like, I think it's going to be pretty fun to watch this team play.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, looking at the preseason games, and we've heard Billy Donovan say this heading into the season, is that for people out there that think that this team is not going to compete or just lay down with everything with their 82 games, that's not going to be the case. They're going to be competitive. And that's what I saw, even though it was preseason, right, with their rotational guys, but mainly with their starters. And that was one of the things that stood out to me is just in terms of from the first game, how each game this team continued to get better. And that was really impressive. And you got to put some weight to that. And I know, again, we keep saying this thing about preseason and certain teams having certain guys in, and are they really playing hard, or will we see certain rotational guys get as many minutes? I can't give you that answer, but I think for these main rotational guys that are starters, and let me just speak in starters in general, like we saw against the Minnesota Timberwolves and how we saw a little bit against the Milwaukee Bucks a couple of weeks ago, and we saw it again against the Cleveland Cavaliers in the final preseason game for the Bulls. You saw the marquee guys for those teams in the game for a majority of that game. So I don't think that a Giannis Antetokounmpo, who never understands how to just take it lightly and go easy, like Giannis is always 100%. And I love that about Giannis. I think we all love that about Giannis because he's cut from a different cloth, like that old school type of cloth. And it's the same thing for a couple of other players that we saw the Bulls go up against, like Anthony Edwards, even though he had a bad shooting night against the Bulls last Wednesday in the United Center. But still, when you have your starters facing off against starters from another team, despite it being preseason, you're still really sharpening some things and really putting a note in your pen or your pad about what you can get away with and what you can kind of exploit against those opponents. So I think for this Bulls team, they saw what they could be successful in, and that's pushing tempo and that's taking threes. But it's one thing to take threes, you got to make threes. And the best example of that, I would say, Drew, for this Bulls team was against the Minnesota Timberwolves, where they shot lights out in the first half, 56%. Now they came back down to earth just a little bit, but finished the game with 42% from three. But you made a great point in terms of them sharing the basketball. And that's the thing that I think they can really rely on going throughout the season, because we talked about and hinted towards just how guard heavy they are. But Lonzo Ball is one of those dudes that helps this offense go. And we'll dive into Lonzo a little bit deeper. But when he's on the court, it's really infectious, that sharing of the basketball. And so you have back-to-back games where the Bulls had over 30 assists. I believe it was 32 against the Timberwolves, and finished the preseason with 34 against the Cavaliers. Those are all great signs. One, because Billy Donovan can look at that stat sheet. Of course, he's going to look more at than the stat sheet and look at the film, but he can see the box score and see those team stats and understands that, hey, if we have 30-plus assists and we have up and down tempo, as you mentioned, one of the top teams in the preseason at least, and getting up and down in pace of play, then that really feeds into what I've been preaching the entire training camp of who we have to be, what I've been telling the media, but ultimately just how this roster is constructed, how we have to play to survive. And when I mean survive, that means win ball games. You got to feed into your strengths. And those are the strengths of this Bulls team, of using the athletes that they have, of getting up and down and sharing that basketball. So that makes for exciting offense, but then also it opens up some things on the defensive end that you have to get back and slow those guys down. Because if you're a 7-year-old kid like my son is, to maybe even a grown man playing in rec leagues, you love to go up and down and just jack threes and play up and down pace. That's great, right? Nobody wants that half court grinded out type of game. But when you have that up and down pace, you got to be aware of teams that can really knock down shots, and also have the athletes that can get offensive rebounds and have continued life and continued possessions on their offensive end, which makes your life even more difficult on the defensive end. So those few points that for me stood out for this Bulls team throughout their 5 preseason games. And I'm making a note just like, okay, they're getting up and down. They're not hesitant to shoot threes. They're sharing the basketball. They're getting downhill in certain situations. Zach looks really healthy. Zach is still a bucket, and also reminding people that he's still a bucket. You have Iota Sumu making sure that he's building off of what we saw from January 2nd on to the end of the season. And then also Kobe White, who stepped up as well, knocking down his shot. So to your point, everybody looks comfortable. One, everybody is healthy, but it gets real on Wednesday because you have the New Orleans Pelicans. And we're going to get to that first 5 games for the Bulls and also that opening night game against the Pelicans in New Orleans. But from what I've gathered from this preseason, This team is going to win more than 27 and a half games, Vegas. I don't know who the hell is hating on the Bulls with 27 and a half wins that's setting at the total for this team. They will get over that. There will be at least 30 wins, and I could possibly, and don't look at me crazy when I say this, Drew, possibly be a team that could fight their way into the play-in if all healthy, if everything continues to trend upwards. And that's the hope for this Bulls team, knowing with the Eastern Conference, with certain teams, how they will slip up and not show up. Cleveland Cavaliers, I'm talking to you, because we just saw examples of that last Friday night against the Chicago Bulls. But there is a chance for this team to open up some eyes, and that's really the main point that I'm getting to as we head into the 82.
No, I definitely agree with you. Do you think that Lonzo Ball would be your answer if I asked you which player stood out the most to you this preseason?
Oh, no doubt. No doubt it's Lonzo. And he only played 2 games, right? But the great thing about Lonzo is this. If everything goes well, and we hope that the basketball guys bless him and that he is able to return back to the Lonzo Ball in those 35 games that we saw having the Bulls as one of the best teams in the NBA, then you're going to look at him and have that procedure and that surgery that he had on his knee be renamed to the Lonzo Ball surgery or the Lonzo Ball procedure. Because now you're looking at players that needed more cartilage or had knee issues and want to prolong and continue on their NBA career. You got to get the Lonzo surgery. So this is a very small sample size, but you have to be impressed for a guy that has not played in 2.5 seasons and has had 3 surgeries on his knee. There was concern about Lonzo Ball being able to just run again with those knee issues. He had to relearn how to run again as he did his PT. So not only to see him against the Timberwolves get on the floor and that made-for-TV movie moment when he caught the ball, his first shot went in from the corner, and just he went on to build from that and just knock down shots and just bring back that energy that we love from Lonzo Ball of just making a simple pass ahead or finding Zach LaVine for a backdoor or cutting himself backdoor and getting a little too ahead of himself, Drew, and asking for lives by pointing that finger up for P. Will. But you look at that game where he played 15 minutes, and the big question for a lot of people, including myself, was, okay, we saw that last Wednesday. We know the Bulls have one more preseason game on Friday against the Cavaliers. How will Lonzo Ball's body respond to having a day's rest? And he looked fresh to me. I mean, Friday against the Cavaliers, 16 minutes, still getting up and down, still making plays. A guy, again, that when I look at the box score, 11 points, so double-digit points, and he was aggressive with his shot. He does not hesitate, and that's one thing that fans have to really take account of and make note of, is that Lonzo is not hesitating out there on the court, which lets us know and should let you know that he's confident in his knee, that he's not even thinking about his knee. He just wants to go hoop. So definitely Lonzo Ball in this preseason, only 2 games, 2 out of the 5. He's been the most impressive dude for me, man, because that's been a situation where everybody's looking at Lonzo to see what he can be, what he looks like health-wise, and what he can bring to this team. What about you, though? Is it Lonzo? If not Lonzo, let me challenge you and give me another name that stood out to you.
Yeah, no doubt. It would definitely be Lonzo, but I think my runner-up would be Julian Phillips. Unfortunately, we did not get to see him play every preseason game, but the ones we did see him play, shot looked pretty good. He's shooting it with confidence. He does still have kind of that wide base that he sets with before he gets ready to take those catch and shoot trays. But if he can do that, if he can knock down that shot, we know that he's going to play with energy. He's going to play with motor. He's going to be pretty much in the right spot defensively, consistently. He should be in this rotation. Now, again, we'll get into that a little bit later. He's got some positional battles there for minutes, but that 3-point shot can make a world of difference for him. And it just was good to see him come out there and deliver from the arc the way he did.
Yeah, and Phillips is one of those guys that, again, feeds into exactly what Billy Donovan wants to do. A wing that's athletic, that can knock down corner threes or threes in general, but then also can find himself helping out on the glass a little bit. And when you think of the glass, you think of Nikola Vucevic, and really just the responsibility, Drew, that he's going to be tasked with this season is to be one of the main, this is Vooch, right? But I don't know if this team has really thought of who's going to be that second or third guy to help Vooch out on the boards. I don't think it has to be a second or third guy. I think it has to be a second, third, and fourth guy to help Vooch out to rebound the basketball, because as tempting as it is to leak out, if you're Zach LaVine, if you're Kobe White, if you're Lonzo Ball or Patrick Williams, you got to make sure you stay in and grab that rebound. So what I've seen from Vooch has been just kind of typical Vooch, right? I mean, he's been a double-double guy in preseason, a guy that I was concerned about being lost in this offense. When you think about up-tempo, up and down, shoot a lot of threes, where does Vucevic fit in? And we know going back to last year, before the season last year, he talked about wanting to take more three-point attempts. Didn't really work out for him in terms of the percentage, so he wasn't efficient in that standpoint. But I saw instances from Vooch, not when he was just the trail big of just catching and shooting, but Drew, he has a little subtleness in his game where he can catch at that trail spot, and for that big that's closing out, kind of rip and go to make a play downhill. And so that's what you like to see from Vooch. And we saw more of that against the Cleveland Cavaliers, which is a great example, knowing that front line of Cleveland with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, who played the majority of that final preseason game for both teams.
Yeah, I think, well, as we spoke to earlier, Vooch looked pretty good. I think he shot 4 of 9 from 3, like 44%, something like that, which, given what we've seen from him the past few seasons with the Bulls, like, that's eye-opening. We don't know how that's going to transfer over to the regular season. Hopefully he can stay 35% or above, because I think that'll help this team offensively, obviously, with the way they want to play 5 out. But you spoke to kind of Vucevic's, like, his lasting ability right now. When that shot may not be falling, he still can be a connector. He still can put it on the floor a little bit and either try to get to the rim, or obviously he's a pretty good passer for his position, and he's unselfish with the ball. So he's another guy that can, if a guy is running out to him haphazardly on a 3, he can get past him and maybe kick out for another teammate. So, yeah, man, just another guy who looked pretty good this preseason, and again, can maybe help this offense carry this team in areas that we know the defense won't.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, man. And speaking of making plays for others, especially when they close out haphazardly, Kobe White, 8 assists in the final preseason game against the Cavaliers. That's Kobe has every year, every offseason with my man Dribble Too Much on IG. Shout out to Dribble Too Much, who for sure got that side of the game locked down. I know there are other trainers out there that train guys, but Dribble Too Much for sure has a good stable of NBA players and just pros in general that he works with every offseason to improve their ball handling. But Kobe White is one of his disciples, and you see that improvement with his ball handling skills, where he's even more comfortable going downhill and making plays off that pick and roll, or just even catching and ripping and making plays for others. And I mentioned those 8 assists that he had against the Cleveland Cavaliers in the final preseason game. I think that's another part of Kobe's game that will be unlocked, because from what I've known of Kobe White, going back to his high school days when he was a McDonald's All-American, to when he got to the North Carolina, to when he got to the Chicago Bulls, is that, yeah, you can put him in that point guard spot, but he was more of a scoring point guard and like score first, score second type of point guard. He wasn't really a guy at that stage of his career that was consistently making plays for others. But once he's made his name known in the league as a lethal threat from the arc, and also just with his jumper in general, and also getting to the lane, we saw a lot of that last year. But I think he understood that this season he wants to expand his game and make plays for others. So I think that ultimately helps the Chicago Bulls, and it's another reason why they had 34 assists in that final preseason game against the Cavaliers, because you have guys like Kobe White drawing defenders, a second or sometimes third defender, and it's that quick pass out, 2 guys on the arc, or even just dumping it down to Nikola Vucevic, who is there, again, as that trail big. So on that transition, if Kobe's catching on the wing, Drew, and he's ripping or getting to the rim, you also have that big that's at the top of the key defensively trying to jump down and help down against his teammate they got to beat. And so you have Vucevic diving to the floor, or diving down to the paint, and that's an easy dump off to Vooch for buckets. So Kobe's game for sure can take another level when it comes to being a creator for others.
Yeah, you spoke to it. He takes great pride in last year being a starting point guard, his first or second year being a starting point guard. Like he takes that seriously. He talked to us about not taking that for granted and what that opportunity means to him. But for this team, for what he can do, like I feel like he's just so much better served like off ball where he can attack closeouts, he can get to the rim. We've seen him do that in pretty good production this preseason. Of course, we know he can shoot the basketball. You know, last year he
shoot the leather off the basketball.
Shoot the leather off of it. we saw last year like he kind of split time with DeMar, but I thought he looked so much better playing off of DeMar. You know, where the defense is kind of shading toward DeMar and maybe giving Kobe a little too much space, and he would take advantage of it that way. On this team, where he's sharing the responsibilities with Giddey and Zach at times and playing off of those two guys, like I think there's another level that he can take. I've heard some people suggest that he's on an all-star trajectory. I don't know if I see that just because of the other players in the East he would have to vie for that spot, but he's always working for it. He's always working for it.
Yeah, it is. He is.
But I think he's in a good spot just to kind of play off of guys. Not that he can't create his own shot and do those types of things, but he's just so much more lethal coming off the ball, I think. And, we'll see what happens this season when he's got hopefully a healthy Zach LaVine and hopefully Josh Giddey that's clicking on the same cylinders that, made him the draft pick that he was and the player that he was before this last season with OKC, before they got the type of team together to put him on the bench and make him kind of expendable. So we're looking for big things for Kobe and, some other guys too. But, he puts the work in, and there's no reason why he can't do the same things off ball that he was doing last season, if not even to a better extent.
Okay, man. So preseason is over. And let me just say it is over. Finally, we get to the real thing. But before you get to the real thing, you got to finalize that roster and that 15th and final roster spot that we had spoke about on the By the Horns podcast. Had an interesting situation because you had the hometown kid from the north side of Chicago, Taylor Horton Tucker, competing for that final roster spot with a few other players. But when the dust was settled, it was THT finally getting that 15th and final roster spot with Adama Sanogo, DJ Stewart, and EJ Liddell from Bellwood West High School down in Southern Illinois, getting that third two-way deal. So when you go and think about, as I mentioned, this guard-heavy roster, especially Drew, off the bench, how does THT fit, man? We know that he's a bucket, but how does he fit with a team that when you bring a guy off the bench, it's one thing to score, but you got to bring some defense as well?
Man, that's the question, right? Like, how does Billy Donovan juggle all that? Because after you get past the starting five, when you get past Jalen Smith and Ayo Dosunmu, it's like, who are those next three players that Billy's going to turn to? Because we expect him to play a 10-guard or a 10-man rotation with the type of team that he has and a roster that he has. Because
some nights it could be Lonzo. I mean, if it's not a back-to-back, it could be Lonzo into that fold. If it's not Lonzo into that fold, then that opens up another spot for another guard off of that bench, possibly Javon Carter, who had a very solid preseason showing and wants to have a better showing for himself this season. So for more context for everybody out there, starting five for this Bulls team, how we're viewing this is going to be Josh Giddey, Kobe White, Zach LaVine, Patrick Williams, and Nikola Vucevic. So those are your five starters that we foresee with this Bulls team when they open up their regular season against the Pelicans in New Orleans. But to your point, Drew, after that, after Jalen Smith and Ayo Dosunmu, it's kind of up for grabs, man, in some situations of who comes off that bench.
Yeah, I think it's game to game because I think Dalen Terry will be important for the type of on-ball defense he can play. As his jump shot, he still works that to be a workable trait in his game. Right. And then sometimes you might need THT off the bench to provide that scoring kick, that draw and kick threat, facilitating for teammates. You still got Chris Duarte, who I think him and Javon Carter, I think, are kind of on the outside looking in. Like, I think those 8, 9, and 10th men, when Lonzo was not there, let me make that clear. When Lonzo was not there, you're looking at like Buzelis and Phillips and Dalen Terry, you know what I'm saying, and THT revolving in there some way. So it's going to be kind of matchup dependent. And then also, like you said, with Lonzo Ball, like how long is he going to be on this 16 minutes per game minute restriction?
Right.
Whenever that gets lifted, that's going to affect guys playing time as well. But Billy's going to have some interesting choices to make. And I'm really interested to see like his closing lineups this season.
Yeah.
It's always kind of been
That's
a
a great
thing.
point.
Yeah. It's always been a thing these last couple seasons.
Because if you're talking closing lineup, you need scoring. And when you look at this Bulls roster, the best scorer on this Bulls roster is Zach LaVine. Unless you see somebody else, Drew, but it has to be Zach LaVine as the best scoring option for this Bulls team. I think Kobe White is the next name after that, but you would believe that those two guys would be on the court. Now, after that, you're talking defense. And you can go with a good variety of guys. You can throw Patrick Williams in there just because of his size and his athleticism and his strength. You could throw a possible Dalen Terry in there. You could throw a Torrey Craig in there. That's a name that we haven't mentioned with a guy coming off the bench that could be in that mix of Buzelis, Phillips, Terry, along with Craig. So like those are four guys right there at the forward spot. So it makes it interesting to see who those other pieces are. I will believe that Nikola Vucevic would be on that closing rotation or closing five. But the spots are there. And that's the interesting thing about this Bulls team, especially off the bench. And what makes it dope is that you have an opportunity to get minutes, and not only get minutes, but steal minutes from other guys. So it makes it competitive. And not to say that for this team that they're trying to, really just like Big Willie certain teammates or just do more and I'll just outshine them to a point where they're embarrassing. Not like that, but it's a healthy competition.
Yeah.
Where you're like, okay, cool. I'm going to get my minutes. I'm going to make sure that when I get on the court, I make an impact so that when Billy D looks down that bench, he's looking at my number or he's looking at my face saying, okay, we need you into the game, right? And so it's like that healthy competition. And I think it's good for this team, right? Because you're going to have guys passion-wise. They're going to want it even more. And then at the end of the day, man, you got a team that's going to be hungry because nobody's checking for them. And I think that's one of the best motivators that you can have as just a hooper and also a basketball team when nobody's checking for you or they're writing negatively about you. So from what we've seen, this team could open up eyes again, but just for that grouping alone off the bench, it will be very interesting to see who gets minutes and then also for that closing five, who that closing five will be. So I just maybe name 3 of the 5 when you think about Zach, Kobe, and Vooch. It could be Josh Giddey at the point guard spot.
Ayo has to be in there.
Ayo could.
I can't see Ayo
that's another caveat about this is that for that secondary or third guard that you're going to have with this group, could it be Giddey? Could it be Lonzo? Could it be Ayo? It's a tough but good situation to have for Billy Donovan.
It is, but I definitely think Ayo's going to be. He has to be in that closing lineup just for his defense. He's probably their best two-way player. He's got to be their best two-way player. And then I'm not sure who you would put second. Maybe Patrick Williams. We're still waiting for that offense to kind of come along, but he's showing some signs. And again, I think it's important to kind of give him a little bit of grace. I know some fans are tired of waiting to see Patrick, but I think because of the injuries that he's coming off of, you have to give him a little time to ramp up, get his feet under him, get his legs under him. But I think those would be my top 2 choices in terms of guys who can positively affect the game on both sides of the court. And that's why I think we might see a closing lineup of very familiar faces, the ones you named already, Vooch, Zach, Kobe, and then Ayo and Patrick, and then some nights maybe Lonzo's in there as well. Which is kind of weird, right? Like you made some changes, you got these young guys, but that is pretty much what I feel like is going to be their closing 5 on a lot of nights. It's like guys we're already familiar with.
Right, yeah, and depending on what that lineup is, that closing lineup for other teams. I mean, we've heard Patrick Williams talk about him playing small ball 5, right? When certain teams go small ball. So that's an interesting situation. I'm not too comfortable. Let me just be real about this, about Patrick Williams at that 5 spot. I think he's going to have a hell of a challenge defending the 4s in the league. But if the Bulls do go small ball 5, then you're looking at a Lonzo being in that lineup for sure, and Io being in that lineup to help things out, or possibly even a Josh Giddey just to kind of get them in offensive situations or just natural flow so that you don't have a Zach initiating offense, creating offense, scoring it. Kobe, we know that he can be at that point guard position, but you just said earlier in the podcast, in the episode, that he's best served, which I agree, off the ball, because he just makes him more of a threat. So that is another interesting conversation for Billy Donovan of that small ball lineup for this team. But if you want to play up tempo, there are going to be some nights that Nikola Vucevic, depending on what that matchup is and who that matchup is, he won't be able to be on the floor just because certain teams play a certain brand of basketball when it comes to small ball basketball, that it forces guys like Nikola Vucevic off of the floor. Like, that's one of the reasons why teams play small ball, so they can force that big out and kind of make it a more open game. So it's not to say that Nikola Vucevic can't play an up and down, free-flowing type of game. I believe that he can. He has a skill set to do it, but it's the continuation of playing at that type of pace where it could wear on Vooch.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Do you feel like – I feel like THT is going to be like the most overqualified 15th man.
100%. 100%. 100%. Because I can't remember the last 15th man on the roster that averaged 10 points per game for 3 straight seasons, the last 3 straight seasons. And 2 of those last 3 seasons were in Utah, where he just got right at 20 minutes per game. So my man, when he gets in the game, he already knows what time it is. You know what type of time THT is on. He's like, look, I'm back at the crib, especially. I'm playing for my hometown team. I got my mama in the crowd. I got my cousins in the crowd. I'm going to make sure that I show out, but show out in the way that it helps the team. Not to say that I'm going to go a full just wild kind of situation where he's just disrupting all the offense and just doing his own thing one-on-one, but he's going to make sure that his presence is felt. And again, this is one of the more experienced 23-year-olds that we have in the NBA with his position and his role, right? You don't see too many guys at that age. Really, most of those guys are either in the G League or overseas when you think about them being able to be a vital piece off the bench at a guard spot and consistently averaging double figures. So it's that experience that he's going to bring, and just that versatility scoring the basketball that's going to open up a lot of eyes.
No doubt. And I think that's got to be the big reason why this front office chose to sign him to a standard contract. You know, they wanted to go in the direction of keeping young guys with experience, and he fits the bill to a T. So not really sure how he's going to fit into the rotation on every single night, but he does give this team a little something different. You know, he can score the ball, can handle the rock, can facilitate. We've seen him, you know, put forth the effort defensively. We've obviously seen him knock down some big shots the last 2 preseason games. So, yeah, man, THT's been here before, man.
No doubt. And again, nobody's trying to guard somebody that's 6'4", 257 pounds going downhill on you and giving you all just broad Chicago shoulders right into your sternum. And you expect to deal with that the entire time, and you're a rotational guy off the bench. Like, no, I don't want to deal with that, man. Go ahead and get your buckets, because clearly you got another agenda for yourself. And I get it. I respect it, brother. But you got to chill on the 250-pound shoulder going right into my chest, man. Relax on that.
He's a bowling ball, man. He is a bowling ball.
Man, like, for real, get out of the way when THT is going downhill. When you see 22 coming downhill, just move, please.
Right.
Just move out the way. But also, he contorts his body too in the air and making plays and doing like that Kyrie reverse and flip off the rim and, you know, reverse layups, all those different things. So it's a great luxury to have Taylor Horton-Tucker as your 15th man on your roster, but also being the 15th man that can really go out there and help your team. And that's what we've seen throughout the preseason. I'm sure we'll see more of that throughout the regular season, which starts on Tuesday for some teams, because we got a nice doubleheader on Tuesday. You got the Knicks in Boston against the Celtics, and then you have the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Lakers. So I love those 2 matchups, Drew, to get things going. But the matchup we're really going to be focused on, since we're Bulls fans and we're doing the By the Horns podcast, of course, it's going to be the Bulls on Wednesday night in New Orleans against Zion, Brandon Ingram, Trey Murphy III, who just signed a nice contract extension for himself. I believe he's still on the shelf, still dealing with injury history, so he won't be available. But still, this is a New Orleans team that has a big, not even chip, but a boulder on their shoulder just seeing how their regular season and their play-in spot finish, right? I mean, Zion against the Lakers, balling out, and then he has a hamstring injury, takes him out, and that just changes the whole outcome of that game for the New Orleans Pelicans. So this is a team for them. Not only is it their season opener, it's their home opener. So you know the arena is going to be crazy. Now, I've never been to New Orleans, Drew, and I know it's a Wednesday night, but I've heard stories about New Orleans, and I know that they're whatever team it is, party team, social media team, what marketing team, they're going to have it set out for the Pelicans on Wednesday night. But that starts it off for the Bulls with the first of their 82 games. And when you look at the first 5 games of this Bulls team, the NBA didn't do them any favors at all. In fact, they didn't do them any favors for their entire season because the Bulls have one of the more tougher schedules of NBA teams. In fact, they're in the top 5 of the toughest schedules of NBA teams. And it starts Wednesday night against the Pelicans. But you have the Pelicans Wednesday night, Drew. You get a break Thursday, a little breather. Then you have to go to Milwaukee to face off against Giannis and the Milwaukee Bucks. And that's another team with a boulder on their shoulder because seeing how what the past 2 playoff runs have been for this Bucks team and also last season with the first season of Damian Lillard. Then you have Alex Caruso coming back to the United Center Saturday night for the Bulls home opener and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So that's just your first 3 from Wednesday to Saturday. Then when you start next week, you got to go to Memphis, and then you come back home to Chicago to face off against the Orlando Magic. So when you look at those first 5 games, and again, I don't know who we pissed off basketball god-wise or who pissed off NBA Commissioner Adam Silver, but y'all wrong for this schedule, man. Y'all so wrong for this schedule. But break down that first 5 for me, man, and just, make it make sense of what's going to happen possibly. And why is it like this? Why are we being tortured like this? This ain't right.
Hey, man, I mean, simply put, it's going to be tough, man. I saw you talking about this with David Hall in the league. Like, it's going to be tough. I think you guys spoke to, what game, if any, did you guys see as possible wins that this Bulls team can nab? And I think for me, it's that very first one. You come out the gates, teams don't necessarily know what to expect from you, catching them, obviously, their first time out in real action, live game action. But, if there's any one of these games that I think the Bulls have the best chance of getting, it's this first one against the Pelicans. Yeah. Maybe catch them off guard a little bit. You spoke to Trey Murphy III being out with a right hamstring injury. They're also not going to see Chris Middleton, I don't think, when they play Milwaukee on Friday.
He's still dealing with coming back from the ankle surgeries that he had in the all season. So that's the piece that'll be going for the Bucks. And let's just be real about it. I mean, we saw it in the preseason for the Bulls, that third preseason game, I believe, in Milwaukee, where they played them tough. And again, the Bucks had their starters in, and Giannis was going full Giannis 100%, and Damian Lillard was in as well. And Dame don't have step when he on that court. I don't think that Dame can fake it and just go through the motions. That's just not who he is. And Brook Lopez is out there as well, along with former Bulls Chicago Bobby Portis. So those are opportunities right there for that Bulls team. But I think with you making the point of trying to clip the Pelicans, you see what I did? I clipped the Pelicans' wings all of a sudden. I'm trying to bring bars on this episode.
Hey, man, let them know, man. Let them know.
Man, what? Don't get me into a cipher, man. I'm not about to do that for myself because I will embarrass myself. But if they can get the Pelicans in that first game, surprise them, I think that helps them going into Milwaukee because it goes into that us against the world type of mentality that this team needs to carry for the entire season because that schedule is not giving them any breaks. And if you can beat the Bucks possibly or make it a tough game, you're coming into a back-to-back situation where the energy will already be high because it's a season opener for your team, but also you're playing against a former teammate in Alex Caruso. And let's just be real about it. The Oklahoma City Thunder, who are not only favored to win the West, but also possibly one of the top runners for the NBA title. And I wouldn't be surprised with that, especially with the roster makeup and just the experience that they have on the team.
Yeah, man. And quote unquote revenge game for Josh Giddey, going against the team that, wanted to bench him or did bench him down the stretch of the playoffs and was about to bench him in the season that we're about to embark on. So, I mean, there's a lot of storylines with that game. Speaking of injuries, next week when they face the Grizzlies, there's a good chance that the Grizzlies are not going to have Jaren Jackson Jr. or Luke Kennard. So again, they maybe have an opportunity to catch a team slipping a little bit, a little break. But, for me, we talked about this earlier in the episode, I think that this team will be better served to keep that top 10 protected pick. So in this 5-game stretch that they have, I'm also kind of weighing that against some of the other teams that could be down there in the bottom of the Eastern Conference with them, or just even in the bottom of, both the Western and Eastern Conferences. So I'm talking about the Pistons, the Trailblazers, the Wizards, the Nets. All those teams have some difficult 5-game stretches coming up as well. Some similar opponents too. So, if this thing gets off to a little bit of a rocky start, you might shift your eyes ever so slightly, just a little bit, to kind of the bottom of the standings and where things might fall potentially with them keeping a pick and keeping their pick, and where they might fall, once this season reaches its conclusion. But yeah, man, the schedule makers did not do them any favors. But again, this league is so tough, man. I feel like there is a certain sense of parity now. Of course, you've got your Celtics and you got your, Oklahoma City Thunder's kind of like the top of the top, the creme de la creme. But there's so many kind of good teams bunched in there as well, where if you're not playing, the Wizards or the Nets, you've got a tough game.
Man, the Wizards and Nets just catching strays on the bottom.
Okay, I'm sorry, man.
It is what it is, man. It is what it is. Like
those teams know what they're doing, man. They know what they're doing. It's okay. It's okay.
I mean, I'm gonna throw the Portland Trailblazers in that conversation as well. I'm just, it is what it is. Detroit Pistons, I'm gonna throw you in there as well. Mm-hmm. But it is what it is, though. So it'll be for sure all eyes on Wednesday night to see what this team can be starting off the season. And I get it. It's 82 games. It's a very long season. And if you're a Bulls fan, I'm asking you, please do not live or die with every single game, because you might not even make it to All-Star break. That's just how long the NBA season is. Certain games you have to take with a grain of salt, like these players do, and just move forward. But it is very imperative that they try and get off to one of the best starts that a lot of outsiders don't think that they can get off to. And it starts in New Orleans Wednesday night against the Pelicans. If they can clip them and move forward and have that energy and that confidence raised up even more, you're looking at a team that can carry some things into the months of November and, of course, December. And it just carries on and on and on. So it'll be interesting to see what that game plan is. And it'll be a great test for the Bulls defense against Zion Williamson, against Brandon Ingram, and against DeJounte Murray, who was traded over to the New Orleans Pelicans for themselves in the offseason. So they'll have their hands full at all three spots right there. And so it'll be interesting to see who matches up with who, but also if they can do it by committee defensively, then that'll be a great sign for this team. So we're starting to get to the final moments of the By the Horns podcast before we start the regular season on Wednesday night in New Orleans. Drew, 82 games. What's the season outlook for this Bulls team?
Man, you want a record?
I don't want a record. I'm not going to put you on a spot like that. I can't do that to you. We're not going to do that. But let me just go first. I will say with this Bulls team, if they can stay healthy, and that's relative, right? Because you would hope that, barring health, that this team, with how they looked in preseason, what they could be in terms of growing together, if Zach LaVine can continue to be on this roster, because the greater that Zach plays and shows that he's healthy, which he has already shown, you're going to start fielding calls if you're Arturas Karnisovas. Not saying that they're going to make those calls, but other teams will start calling them to see if Zach is available for some type of deal. But if Zach is on this roster for the majority of this season and for the season, I think this team can be another team that could surprise some people and get to the play-in once again. And also for some Bulls fans, they're like, playing again. But I think with this group that they have more interesting pieces that have a lot to prove than what people realize. And so when you look at the top 6 spots in the Eastern Conference, it's really tough to crack the top 6. And let's just throw them out, Drew. You're talking about the Boston Celtics, the New York Knicks, the Philadelphia 76ers, the Cleveland Cavaliers. Of course, you're talking about the Orlando Magics, right? Like teams like that are legitimately and real and tough, right? So you have teams that will not make it easy for you. And let's not forget about the Miami Heat. We're going to be another one of those teams with a boulder on their shoulder.
I'm glad
So
you
that's
mentioned
just the top 6, and it's going to be difficult. So when you hear play-in, don't scrunch. I'm not talking to you, Drew, but don't scrunch your face up like play-in. Look, the league is so difficult, not just in the West, but also in the East. And it's not much of a drop-off when it comes to the West and the East talent-wise and production-wise, because, again, the NBA champion reigns in the East, and that's the Boston Celtics. So this group, if they could have things go their way, they could be possibly fighting for a spot in the play-in.
Yeah, I think bigger picture just in terms of this season, I think they will be kind of fighting for that 10th spot with the Toronto Raptors. I think on paper they probably have more talent than they do. But again, to your point, we got to see kind of how things shape up as the season goes along. Like, is Zach LaVine still here through the whole season? Is Vooch still here throughout the whole season? What happens there? But I think just overall, I think that they're going to be in a position where, even if they do make the play-in, I don't see them escaping the play-in tournament and making the playoffs. So I think they keep their pick. I think they'll be fun to watch on the offensive side of the ball just because of the style that they've shown to want to play this preseason, passing the rock, getting it going, much more up-tempo style of play, shooting threes. Hopefully, this 3-point shooting that we saw this preseason for some of the guys that we saw, like Vooch and Phillips, Lonzo, Zach, Kobe. Hopefully it stays at a certain level, or if not improves. But I think they're going to be fun to watch offensively. But I just don't think they have much in the way of a team that can make it to the actual playoff field this season.
All right, there it is, man. The NBA regular season starts off Tuesday night with a sweet doubleheader. And then our season starts Wednesday night in New Orleans against the Pelicans. Bulls-Pelicans, the first of 82 for this team. This is the By the Horns podcast presented by Toyota. And remember that Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. So find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. He is Drew Stevens of the Bigs. I'm Cam Smith of CHSN. We appreciate you tapping in with us. Look, let's get after it. We're going to have some exciting basketball and definitely going to have some things to talk about on the By the Horns podcast. Stay locked in with us.